A scared dog, broken and trembling from years of neglect, never wagged her tail. That is, until she met her foster dad. What did he do that no one else could? With patience, love, and a bond that defied all odds, this unlikely pair embarked on a journey of healing that would change both their lives forever. But what was it in her past that left her so shattered? And how did her foster dad unlock the joy she thought she'd never feel again? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The harsh glow of Liam's laptop screen cut through the darkness of his small apartment. Files were scattered across his coffee table, each one telling the story of a child who needed help. His eyes burned as he read through another heartbreaking case, the words blurring together after hours of review. "What difference am I really making?" he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. The children's faces haunted him. So many needs, so few resources to help them all. His phone buzzed, casting a blue light across the dim room. The message was from Happy Tales Rescue. Reminder: Sky arrives tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please confirm pickup. Liam groaned and slumped back into his worn couch. What had he been thinking, agreeing to foster a traumatized racing German shepherd? He could barely keep up with his caseload as it was. But he'd already committed, so he typed a quick "confirmed" and hit send. The next morning, Liam stood in the rescue center's receiving area, watching as staff members tried to coax Sky from her crate. The black dog pressed herself against the back wall, her thin body shaking. "She's still pretty scared," Sarah, the rescue worker, explained softly. "Previous owner treated her badly. She'll need a lot of patience." It took nearly an hour to get Sky into Liam's car. She huddled in the back seat, pressing herself into the corner as far as possible. "It's okay, girl," Liam said quietly as he drove. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." He kept talking in a gentle voice, but Sky remained frozen, her eyes fixed on the window. At home, Sky darted straight under the kitchen table. Her long legs were tucked tight against her body, making herself as small as possible. Liam filled a bowl with water and another with food, placing them nearby. He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, careful not to look directly at her. "Take your time," he said softly. "I'll just sit here with you for a bit." Hours passed. Sky didn't touch the food or water. As evening settled in, Liam's doubts grew stronger. Maybe he wasn't the right person for this. Maybe he should call the rescue center tomorrow and tell them it wasn't working out. Later that night, as Liam brushed his teeth, a quiet sound caught his attention. He carefully peeked around the corner into the kitchen. In the dim light, he could see Sky's nose poking out from under the table, sniffing tentatively at the food bowl. She raised her head, and for just a moment, their eyes met. Then she quickly retreated to her safe space. Liam felt a tiny spark of something in his chest, maybe hope. But as he walked back to his bedroom, doubt crept back in. Was he really qualified to help this damaged soul when he could barely handle his own problems? The early morning sun barely peeked through Liam's kitchen window as he tiptoed to check on Sky. She was still there under the table, her gray body curled into a tight ball. Her eyes were open, watching his every move, but she made no sound. "Good morning, girl," he said softly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he prepared fresh food and water. The bowls from last night were empty. At least she'd eaten something. Still, his heart felt heavy as he got ready for work. The thought of leaving her alone all day made his stomach twist with guilt. At the office, Liam's day went from bad to worse. Mrs. Peterson, a foster parent he'd been working with, sat across from his desk with her arms crossed. "I don't see why it matters if Tommy goes to therapy," she said, rolling her eyes. He's got a roof over his head, doesn't he? Food to eat? Liam pressed his fingers against his temples, fighting a growing headache. Tommy's been through severe trauma. He needs support to heal, not just basic necessities. The woman's dismissive attitude reminded him of Sky, hiding under his kitchen table. Both needed more than just food and shelter. They needed patience, understanding, and genuine care. When Liam got home that evening, his heart sank. Sky hadn't moved from her spot. The new food and water sat untouched. He changed into comfortable clothes and grabbed a bag of special treats the rescue center had given him. Settling onto the floor a few feet from the table, Liam began talking in a quiet, steady voice. "You know, I had a rough day too," he said, placing a treat on the floor between them. "Sometimes people can be pretty difficult to work with." He kept talking, about nothing in particular, just letting Sky get used to his voice. An hour passed, then 2. His back ached from sitting on the hard floor, but he didn't move. Finally, after what felt like forever, Sky's nose emerged from under the table. She stretched it toward his hand, taking a quick sniff before darting back to her safe space. That small gesture made Liam's heart leap, even though she'd retreated again. Later that night, he sat on his couch with his laptop, the blue light illuminating his tired face. He typed, "How to help traumatized dogs" into the search bar, clicking through various articles and forums. The words patience and routine kept appearing in everything he read. Looking over at Sky's hiding spot, he spoke quietly. "I'm not giving up on you." He reached for his phone and set his alarm for an early morning walk, hoping to start establishing the routine they both needed. The next morning arrived with a pale orange sunrise. Liam knelt beside Sky under the table, his movements slow and deliberate as he reached for her collar. Her body tensed, but she didn't pull away when he gently attached the leash. "That's it, good girl," he whispered. "Want to go for a walk?" Getting her to the front door took nearly 15 minutes of patient coaxing. Each step seemed to cost her tremendous effort, her legs trembling beneath her slim frame. When they finally stepped outside, Sky pressed herself against Liam's leg, her whole body quivering. A car drove past and Sky flinched, trying to retreat back to the doorway. Liam kept the leash loose, letting her set the pace. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're doing great." They made it to the end of the driveway when a dog barked from behind a fence across the street. Sky froze, her ears pinned back against her head. A couple walked by on the sidewalk, and she cowered, trying to make herself as small as possible. Liam's heart ached, watching her struggle, but he kept his voice steady. "Good girl, Sky. You're so brave." Each tiny step forward earned her gentle praise. They'd barely made it around the block when a garbage truck roared past, its hydraulic brakes squealing. Sky panicked, yanking backward on the leash with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide with terror as she tried to bolt. Liam immediately crouched down, keeping the leash slack. Hey, it's all right," he soothed, not reaching for her but staying close. "Nothing's going to hurt you." He kept talking in a low, calm voice until her frantic breathing began to slow. For the first time since he'd brought her home, Sky looked directly at him. There was still fear in her eyes, but something else too. A flicker of trust, perhaps. She took a hesitant step toward him. They finished their walk at a snail's pace, Sky jumping at every sudden noise, but recovering more quickly each time. By the time they reached home, she was exhausted, her legs trembling from more than just fear. Inside, Sky made straight for her water bowl, drinking deeply before retreating to her spot under the table. Liam sank onto a kitchen chair, feeling as drained as she looked. The short walk had taken nearly an hour and felt like running a marathon. Looking at Sky's huddled form, he realized just how much work lay ahead of them. but those few moments of trust made it worth every second. The morning sun had barely risen when Liam's alarm blared. He stumbled through his routine, brushing his teeth while trying to pack his work bag. His eyes kept darting to the clock, knowing he was already behind schedule. "Come on, Sky," he called, grabbing her leash. "We need to hurry." The dog cowered under the table, her body rigid as he approached. Liam reached for her collar, his movements quick and jerky with impatience. Sky pulled back, pressing herself against the wall. "Sky, please!" Liam snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. The moment the words left his mouth, he saw her violent flinch, her eyes wide with fear. Shame washed over him immediately. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," he whispered, dropping to his knees. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to slow down. "That wasn't fair to you. Let's try again, okay?" At work, Liam sat in a sparse room across from 8-year-old Mateo. The boy stared at the floor, shoulders hunched, refusing to acknowledge Liam's presence. 30 minutes passed with only the sound of the wall clock ticking. "Would you like to draw something?" Liam asked, sliding paper and crayons across the table. Mateo didn't move. His supervisor's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Lawson, a word?" In the hallway, she fixed him with a stern look. "You seem distracted lately. These children need your full attention." "I know, I'm sorry," Liam replied, running a hand through his hair. "I've just been—" "Just make sure it doesn't affect your work," she interrupted, walking away. Liam watched Mateo through the window, the boy's isolation mirroring Sky's. An idea struck him. Maybe they could help each other. He'd bring Sky tomorrow, bend the rules a little. It had to be better than leaving her alone all day. That evening, Liam arranged Sky's things near the door. Her leash, a blanket, some treats, and a water bowl. He settled on the kitchen floor, keeping a respectful distance from her spot under the table. "I met a boy today who reminds me of you," he said softly. "He's scared too. Maybe you two could be friends." As he talked about his day, describing Mateo and his hopes for tomorrow, something remarkable happened. Sky inched forward, just a little, her nose poking out from under the table. She didn't come all the way out, and her tail remained still, but it was the closest she'd voluntarily come to him since arriving. Liam's heart swelled at this tiny sign of progress. He kept his voice gentle, determined to help both this wounded dog and the wounded children in his care find their way to trust again. The early morning light cast long shadows across the driveway as Liam held Sky's leash. She stood frozen by the car door, her legs trembling slightly. "It's okay, girl," Liam whispered, keeping his voice steady. "We're going to meet someone special today." After several minutes of gentle coaxing, Sky climbed into the back seat. Her thin body pressed against the door as far from Liam as possible. He adjusted the rearview mirror to keep an eye on her while he drove. "You're doing great," he said softly, navigating through the quiet streets. Every time they hit a bump or stopped at a light, Sky would whimper quietly. Liam kept talking, his voice a constant stream of reassurance. When they arrived near Mateo's foster home, Liam parked under a shady tree a block away. He wanted to give Sky time to settle before going in. She sat rigid in the back seat, her eyes darting between Liam and the unfamiliar surroundings. Inside Mateo's foster home, the boy disappeared behind the living room couch the moment they entered. Sky pressed herself against Liam's legs, trying to make herself as small as possible. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Liam knelt down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Mateo, this is my friend Sky. She's a little nervous about meeting new people, just like you." A small head peeked out from behind the couch. Mateo's dark eyes fixed on Sky, studying her carefully. The dog remained perfectly still, watching the boy with equal intensity. "She won't hurt you," Liam said quietly. She's just scared sometimes, and that's okay. Mateo emerged slightly from his hiding place, still low to the ground. His hand reached out, trembling slightly in the space between them. Skye stretched her neck forward, her nose twitching as she caught his scent. Instead of retreating, she held her position, allowing the connection. Liam's breath caught in his throat as he watched Skye's tail move. Just the tiniest wag, but it was there. It was the first time she'd shown any sign of happiness since he'd met her. On the drive home, Liam kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Skye. She still pressed against the door, but her posture seemed slightly more relaxed. He thought about the moment between her and Mateo, how two wounded souls had reached out to each other in their own quiet way. The alarm chirped softly in the early morning darkness, but Liam was already awake. His mind buzzed with possibilities after yesterday's breakthrough with Skye and Mateo. He padded to the kitchen, the wooden floor cool beneath his feet, and started his morning routine. As he poured coffee into his favorite mug, the sound of nails clicking on the floor made him pause. Skye emerged from her corner, her steps hesitant but purposeful. When Liam set down her food bowl, she approached without her usual fearful delay. She even lifted her eyes to meet his for a brief moment before lowering her head to eat. "Well, look at you," Liam said softly, careful not to startle her. His heart swelled at this small sign of progress. At Mateo's foster home later that morning, the boy was waiting by the window. His face lit up when he saw Skye, though he tried to hide his excitement. Liam noticed how Skye's tail gave a slight wag when she spotted the boy. "Can ... Mateo's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we take her outside?" Liam blinked in surprise. It was the first time he'd heard Mateo speak. "Of course we can. Would you like to hold her leash?" Mateo nodded, his eyes wide. Liam showed him how to hold the leash properly, not too tight but secure enough. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, Mateo matching his pace to Skye's cautious steps. The boy's shoulders straightened a little more with each successful moment. "You're doing great, both of you," Liam said, watching as Skye walked calmly beside Mateo. She seemed steadier today, less startled by passing cars and distant noises. That evening, Liam sat on his couch with a plate of leftover lasagna, reflecting on the day's events. Movement caught his eye as Skye settled onto the carpet near the edge of the living room. Her body wasn't coiled tight as usual. Instead, she lay with her head resting on her paws, watching him with softer eyes. It was the first time she hadn't retreated under the kitchen table for dinner. Liam smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that first terrified day. He noticed she'd positioned herself where she could see both him and the front door, still cautious, but choosing to be present. "Good girl, Skye," he whispered, and her ears twitched at the sound of his voice. The morning air was crisp as Liam and Skye ventured out for their walk. Usually they stuck to a short route around the block, but today Liam decided to try something different. He guided them toward the small park at the end of the street. Skye paused at first, her ears twitching at the unfamiliar direction. But after a gentle, "Come on, girl," from Liam, she followed, her steps becoming smoother as they walked. The early morning meant fewer people were out, giving Skye space to adjust to the new route. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, who was always out early watering her flowers, looked up as they passed. "Well, look who's coming out of her shell," she called softly. "She's walking so nicely now." Liam hadn't realized how much Skye had changed until that moment. Gone was the constant trembling and cowering that had marked their first walks. Now she moved with a quiet grace, though still cautious. Later that morning at work, Liam's stomach dropped when his supervisor, Ms. Rodriguez, called him into her office. Her stern expression told him this wasn't a casual chat. "Liam, we need to discuss the dog," she said, folding her hands on her desk. Several staff members have reported seeing you bringing an unauthorized animal to client visits. Sky has been helping, Liam explained, leaning forward. You should see how the children respond to her. Mateo, he's actually speaking now. I understand your intentions, Ms. Rodriguez cut in, but this isn't a certified therapy animal. The liability issues alone. She shook her head. If anything were to happen, the department would be responsible. This needs to stop immediately. But this isn't a discussion, Liam. If you continue bringing the dog, I'll have to take formal disciplinary action. Is that clear? Liam's jaw clenched, but he nodded. As he left her office, his mind was already racing, trying to figure out how to work within the rules while still helping both Sky and the children. That evening, Liam sat cross-legged on his living room floor, his back against the couch. The weight of Ms. Rodriguez's warning pressed heavily on his thoughts. What are we going to do, girl? He muttered, absently reaching out to stroke Sky's fur. She lay closer to him than ever before. Her body relaxed. We're finally making progress, and now this. As if sensing his distress, Sky shifted beside him. Then, in a movement that made his breath catch, she slowly lifted her head and rested it on his knee. It was such a simple gesture, but coming from Sky, it felt monumental. Thanks, girl, he whispered, feeling tears prick at his eyes. The warmth of her trust gave him a renewed sense of purpose. The morning sun cast long shadows across the park as Liam walked Sky along the winding path. The dewy grass sparkled, and the air felt fresh and clean. Sky moved more confidently now, though she still stayed close to Liam's side. Near the playground, children's laughter rang out as families gathered for early morning play. A little girl squealed with delight as she zoomed down a slide, while her mother watched from a nearby bench. Another family spread out a blanket for a morning picnic, their toddler carefully arranging stuffed animals in a circle. Liam stopped to let Sky sniff a patch of grass, and as he watched the families, something clicked in his mind. This public space, free from the constraints of his office, it could be the answer he was looking for. His heart began to race with excitement as the idea took shape. He could organize informal meetings here, outside of work hours, where Sky could interact with the children in a relaxed setting. Back home, Liam spent the afternoon at his kitchen table, his phone in one hand and a notepad in the other. He carefully dialed the number for Mateo's foster parents first. "Hi, Mrs. Carter, it's Liam," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I had an idea I wanted to run by you. Would you and Mateo be interested in meeting at Jefferson Park this weekend? Sky would be there." He held his breath while waiting for her response. To his relief, Mrs. Carter sounded enthusiastic. "Mateo hasn't stopped talking about Sky," she said. "That's the most we've heard him speak since he arrived." Encouraged, Liam made more calls. Each positive response made his idea feel more real, more possible. He jotted down notes and started sketching out loose plans for activities that would help the children feel comfortable. As evening settled in, Liam decided it was time to create a proper space for Sky. He arranged a plush bed in the corner of his living room, placing it where she could see both the front door and the kitchen. He set out a few soft toys nearby. Nothing too overwhelming, just a gentle invitation to play when she felt ready. Sky watched from her usual spot as he worked, her head tilted slightly. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and patted the bed. "What do you think, girl? Want to try it out?" At first, Sky didn't move. Then slowly she rose and padded over to investigate. Her nose worked carefully over every inch of the bed, taking in the new scent. Finally, after what seemed like ages to Liam, she stepped onto the cushion, turned in a circle, and settled down. Liam's chest felt warm as he watched her relax into her new bed. It was a small victory, But these days, he was learning to appreciate those most of all. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunshine and a gentle breeze that rustled the trees in Jefferson Park. Liam's hand shook slightly as he packed a canvas bag with carefully chosen items: liver treats for Sky, juice box and cookies for the kids, and a few simple toys. He checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. "What if no one shows up?" he murmured to Sky, who sat watching him with her gentle eyes. She tilted her head, and Liam managed a small smile. "At least I've got you, right?" The drive to the park felt longer than usual. Liam's stomach churned with doubt as he pulled into the parking lot. He chose a quiet spot near the grassy area, away from the busy playground. Sky followed him willingly now, though she still moved with careful steps. They waited on a checkered blanket Liam had spread out under a maple tree. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Liam's heart sank a little with each passing moment. But then he spotted them, Mateo and his foster parents walking across the grass. Mateo's face lit up when he saw Sky, though he still held tightly to Mrs. Carter's hand. Shortly after, another family arrived, then another. Within 15 minutes, 4 foster families had gathered, creating a small circle on the grass. The children hung back at first, watching Sky with curious eyes. Mateo was the first to move, slowly letting go of Mrs. Carter's hand. He approached Sky with quiet confidence, remembering their previous meeting. Sitting cross-legged beside her, he began to stroke her back with gentle movements. "She likes it when you pet her like this," Mateo said softly to a little girl who had edged closer. His words seemed to break the tension, and soon other children joined him. Liam showed them how to offer treats with flat palms, his chest swelling with pride as Sky accepted each offering with growing ease. When a small girl in pigtails held out a treat, Sky's tail wagged ever so slightly, a tiny movement that brought tears to Liam's eyes. The morning passed quickly, filled with quiet conversations and careful interactions. As families began to pack up, several foster parents approached Liam. "This was wonderful," Mrs. Carter said, squeezing his arm. "Mateo hasn't stopped smiling." "Please tell me you'll do this again," another parent added. On the drive home, Liam glanced in the rearview mirror. Sky had her head rested against the window, her eyes peaceful. The morning's success filled his chest with warmth, replacing his earlier anxiety with quiet confidence. His idea wasn't just possible, it was working. The Sunday morning sunlight streamed through Liam's kitchen window as he prepared breakfast. The gentle clink of kibble hitting Sky's bowl caught her attention, and for the first time, she responded immediately when he called her name. "Come here, girl," Liam said softly, and Sky patted over, her nails clicking against the linoleum floor. When he reached down to scratch behind her ears, her tail wagged with a gentle, steady rhythm. The sight made his heart swell. Just weeks ago, she'd been too terrified to leave the space under his kitchen table. Watching her eat breakfast with newfound confidence, Liam grabbed his laptop and started planning the next park meetup. He jotted down ideas for activities that might help the children open up more, inspired by Sky's progress. Monday morning brought a staff meeting at the Social Services Department. Liam sat through updates about caseloads and policy changes, waiting for the right moment. When his supervisor asked for any other business, he raised his hand. "I've been researching therapy dog programs," Liam said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Many departments like ours have implemented them successfully. I think it could really benefit our kids." His supervisor, Mrs. Thompson, barely looked up from her papers. "We don't have the budget or resources for that kind of program right now," she said dismissively. "Let's focus on our existing protocols." Liam's face flushed with frustration, but he kept quiet. The rest of the day he threw himself into his regular visits, though he missed having Sky by his side. He knew keeping her home was necessary to avoid trouble, but that didn't make it easier. That evening, Liam settled onto his couch with his phone, typing out messages to the foster families about the next weekend's meetup. He suggested meeting an hour earlier to avoid the park's busier times and asked if anyone had activity ideas. As he typed, a movement caught his attention. Sky approached the couch slowly, her head tilted slightly. Then, in a moment that made him hold his breath, she hopped up beside him. She turned in a circle once, twice, before settling down with her head near his leg, her body completely relaxed. Liam looked down at her, taking in the peaceful expression on her face. Tears pricked at his eyes as he remembered the frightened dog who had arrived at his door. Now here she was, choosing to be close to him, trusting him completely. The responses from foster families started coming in, full of excitement about the next meetup. But Liam couldn't take his eyes off Sky. In helping her heal, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was missing. The quiet joy of this moment felt more meaningful than any professional victory. The morning air was crisp as families gathered at the park for the second meetup. Liam held a bright yellow tennis ball in his hand, wondering if Sky was ready for this next step. She pressed against his leg, her eyes darting between the approaching children and the familiar face of Mateo. "Would you like to try playing with Sky?" Liam asked, holding out the ball to Mateo. The boy took it carefully, his eyes meeting Sky's. With gentle movements, he crouched down and rolled the ball toward her. The ball stopped a few feet from Sky's paws. Everyone seemed to hold their breath as she stared at it, her ears twitching forward with interest. After what felt like minutes, she stretched her neck forward and nudged the ball with her nose, sending it rolling back toward Mateo. "She did it!" one of the children squealed, while others clapped and cheered. Sky startled at first, but stayed put, her tail giving the slightest wag at the positive attention. As the morning progressed, more children took turns rolling the ball to Sky. Each time she returned it, her movements became more confident. Liam watched in amazement as Tommy, a usually withdrawn 7-year-old, broke into an unexpected smile when Sky brought the ball directly to him. "Look, Mr. Lawson," Tommy called out, his face lighting up. "She likes me." The transformation in both the children and Sky was remarkable. Where there had once been hesitation and fear, now there was cautious joy. Some of the kids who normally struggled to interact with others were taking turns and encouraging each other. Sky's tail wagged more freely with each passing minute, her eyes bright with newfound confidence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Liam clipped Sky's leash on for the walk home. She fell into step beside him, her stride smooth and assured, so different from the frightened dog who once cowered at every sound. Looking down at her, Liam felt his heart swell with pride. These simple games of catch had somehow become moments of healing, not just for Sky, but for children who needed it most. Liam's stomach dropped when he saw the email from his supervisor requesting an immediate meeting. As he walked down the hallway to her office, his footsteps echoed against the worn linoleum floor. The familiar scent of coffee and old paperwork filled the air. "Close the door, Liam," Ms. Peterson said, her expression stern. She shuffled some papers on her desk before looking up at him. "I've received some concerning information about unauthorized therapy sessions you've been conducting at Parker Park." Liam's throat tightened. "They're just informal meetups." "With our foster children," she cut in. "Using an uncertified therapy dog. Do you understand the liability issues here? One incident, one bite or scratch, and this department could face serious consequences." "Sky would never hurt anyone," Liam protested, leaning forward in his chair. "If you could see the progress these kids are making." "The children aren't the issue here," Ms. Peterson interrupted again. It's the unauthorized nature of these sessions. You're a social worker, Liam, not a certified animal therapist. This needs to stop immediately, or your position here could be at risk. Liam felt his face flush with frustration. These children are opening up in ways they never have before. Tommy spoke for the first time in months. Mateo is showing emotional responses we haven't seen since he entered the system. Sky is helping them feel safe enough to be vulnerable. Ms. Peterson's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. I understand you want to help, but there are proper channels for this kind of program. I need your word that these meetups will end. The drive home felt longer than usual as Liam wrestled with his supervisor's ultimatum. The setting sun cast long shadows across his dashboard, and his mind raced with possibilities and consequences. In his apartment, Liam sank into his worn armchair, running his hands through his hair. Sky padded over and settled beside him, resting her head on his knee. Her warm presence brought a small measure of comfort as he considered his options. What should we do, girl? He whispered, scratching behind her ears. The thought of ending the sessions made his chest tight. He couldn't forget Tommy's smile, or the way Mateo's foster parents had tearfully thanked him for helping their boy come out of his shell. Sky looked up at him with trusting eyes, and Liam remembered how far she'd come, from the terrified dog who once hid under his kitchen table. The park sessions hadn't just helped the children, they'd transformed Sky too. After hours of internal debate, Liam made his decision. He would continue the meetups, but be more careful about when and where they happened. He'd choose different parks, keep the group smaller, and make sure everything stayed under the radar. The risk to his job was real, but the thought of abandoning the children's progress felt impossible. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon as Liam sat at his kitchen table, carefully composing an email on his laptop. Sky lay at his feet, her gentle breathing a calming presence as he chose his words with care. He explained to the foster families about the change in location, suggesting a peaceful park near the edge of town, where towering oaks provided plenty of shade and privacy. What do you think, girl? He asked, looking down at Sky. She lifted her head, her tail making a soft thump against the floor. Yeah, I think this could work too. At the new park that weekend, Liam's shoulders remained tense as he scanned the area for any familiar faces from work. The location was perfect, set back from the main road, with a natural barrier of trees that made it feel like their own private sanctuary. One by one, the families arrived, their children's faces lighting up at the sight of Sky. The tension in Liam's body began to melt away as he watched Sky trot confidently across the grass, her tail held high. She approached Mateo first, pressing her nose into his open palm in greeting. The boy's quiet laugh echoed across the park as she licked his hand. A small group of children gathered around them, rolling a ball back and forth. Even shy Tommy, who usually kept to himself, edged closer to the group. Sky seemed to sense his hesitation and broke away from the others, approaching him with gentle steps. As Tommy stroked Sky's soft fur, his voice emerged, barely above a whisper. I had a dog once, he said, his eyes fixed on Sky's face. Before everything changed. It was the first time he'd spoken about his life before entering foster care. Liam sat cross-legged in the grass beside them, letting Tommy's words flow at their own pace. Sky stayed perfectly still, her presence seemingly giving the boy the courage to continue his story. As the session drew to a close and families began gathering their things, Mateo's foster mother approached Liam. Her eyes were bright with emotion as she pulled him aside. I need you to know something, she said, her voice soft but urgent. Mateo spoke to us at dinner last night. Really spoke, not just one-word answers, but full sentences about his day. She wiped at her eyes. He hasn't done that since he came to live with us 4 months ago. These sessions with Sky, they're changing him. They're giving him hope. Liam felt a warmth spread through his chest as he watched Mateo say goodbye to Sky, giving her one last gentle pat. The boy's shoulders were straighter, his steps lighter as he walked away. In that moment, Liam knew without doubt that he'd made the right choice to continue, regardless of the consequences. Thunder cracked overhead as Liam turned his key in the lock, his shoulders heavy from another long day at work. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. The apartment was eerily quiet except for the pounding rain against the windows. "Sky?" he called out softly. A whimper from the corner of the living room caught his attention. There she was, pressed against the wall, her whole body trembling. Another boom of thunder shook the building, and Sky tried to make herself even smaller, her eyes wide with terror. Liam's heart ached as he slowly approached her, speaking in gentle tones. "Hey, sweet girl, it's okay. You're safe here." He knelt beside her, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. When the next thunderclap came, Sky pressed herself against him, seeking comfort. "I've got you," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her shaking form. Her rapid breathing gradually slowed as he held her, stroking her fur and murmuring reassurances. As the storm raged on outside, Liam's mind wandered to the meetups and the risks he was taking. Each time he organized a session, he feared discovery. The thought of his supervisor finding out made his stomach churn. What if the stress of all this sneaking around was affecting Sky? She'd made such progress, but moments like these reminded him how fragile that progress could be. He looked down at the trembling dog in his arms. Was he being selfish, using her to help the kids, when she still had so much healing to do herself? Maybe he should stop the meetups, focus solely on helping Sky recover. The weight of doubt pressed heavily on his chest. Later that night, as Liam prepared for bed, he noticed Sky following him more closely than usual. Instead of retreating to her bed in the corner, she settled down right next to his bed. When he sat on the edge of the mattress, she lifted her head and pressed her nose against his palm. The gesture was so gentle, so trusting, it made his throat tight with emotion. He placed his hand on her back, and to his surprise, she nuzzled closer, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that hadn't been there in the early days. In that quiet moment, Liam felt his earlier doubts begin to fade. Sky's silent support reminded him why he'd started this journey in the first place. The thunder continued to rumble outside, but Sky remained calm under his touch, showing him just how far she'd come. Maybe that was all the answer he needed. They would keep moving forward together, helping others while helping each other heal. At the park, the autumn breeze rustled through the trees as children played and laughed. Liam noticed a new face among them, a small boy with dark hair who sat alone on a bench, his shoulders hunched forward. Ryan, his newest case, had only been in the foster system for 3 weeks. Sky, who usually stayed close to the more familiar children, seemed to pick up on Ryan's isolation. She lifted her head, ears perking up as she observed him from a distance. With slow, careful steps, she made her way toward the bench. Instead of approaching directly, she settled down a few feet away, laying her head on her paws and keeping her eyes lowered. Liam watched as Ryan glanced at Sky from the corner of his eye. The boy's tense posture gradually relaxed as Sky maintained her peaceful presence nearby. "She's pretty gentle, isn't she?" Liam said softly, sitting down on the grass near them. Ryan nodded slightly, his eyes still on Sky. After a few minutes of silence, he whispered, "At my last house, they had a dog too." "Yeah." Liam kept his voice casual, letting Ryan set the pace. He was mean, though, always barking and jumping. Ryan's fingers twisted in the hem of his shirt. But Sky's different. As if understanding, Sky inched closer, still keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Ryan reached out hesitantly, letting his hand rest on her fur. At the other house, they didn't let me play outside much, said I was too noisy. Liam's heart tightened, but he kept his expression neutral as Ryan continued to talk, his words coming easier as he stroked Sky's soft fur. The boy shared more about his previous foster home, the strict rules, the loneliness, the fear of making mistakes. As the afternoon wore on, Mateo called out to Ryan, waving a tennis ball. Ryan looked uncertain at first, but when Sky stood up and wagged her tail hopefully, a small smile crossed his face. He joined the other children, tossing the ball while Sky bounded between them, her tail wagging with more enthusiasm than Liam had ever seen. Driving home later, Liam watched Sky in the rearview mirror. She sat contentedly in the back seat, tired but relaxed after the afternoon's activities. He thought about Ryan's transformation during the session, from isolated and withdrawn to cautiously joining in the play. And Sky, who months ago would have hidden from strangers, now helping children feel safe enough to share their stories. The parallel between Sky's recovery and the children's healing process struck him deeply. Each small step forward, each moment of trust gained, reinforced his commitment to keeping these sessions going, no matter the professional risk. Liam's stomach dropped as his supervisor, Ms. Thompson, gestured for him to close her office door. Her face was stern, lips pressed into a tight line. "Mr. Lawson, I've received a formal complaint from Sarah in Child Services. She saw you at Riverside Park with several of our foster children and that dog of yours." Ms. Thompson's voice was sharp. "I warned you about this." Liam's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "The sessions are helping them. If you could just see—" "This isn't up for debate," she cut him off. "You're conducting unauthorized therapy sessions without proper documentation or approval. You're putting this department at risk." She leaned forward, her expression severe. "This stops now, or you'll face disciplinary action. I'm talking about suspension, possibly termination." The drive home felt longer than usual. Liam's mind raced with worry as he pulled into his driveway. He needed to talk to someone who would understand. Later that evening, he sat in Mike's living room, his old college friend listening intently as Liam described his predicament. "I can't just stop the sessions," Liam said, running his hands through his hair. "You should see how much progress these kids are making, how much Sky's helping them open up." Mike set down his coffee mug. "What if you made it official? There are nonprofits that specialize in animal therapy. You could partner with one of them, maybe even get community funding." "I wouldn't know where to start," Liam sighed. "The paperwork, the certifications, the time it would take." He shook his head. "And what if it takes too long? These kids need help now." Back home, Liam sank into his couch, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. The sound of gentle paw steps approached, and Sky padded over to him. She rested her head on his lap, her tail moving in a gentle wag. Her warm brown eyes looked up at him with complete trust. Liam scratched behind her ears, feeling torn between his professional obligations and what he knew in his heart was right. The thought of letting down these children, of taking away something that was finally helping them heal, made his chest tight. But losing his job would mean he couldn't help anyone at all. Sky nuzzled his hand, sensing his distress. Her presence, once so uncertain and fearful, had become a steady source of comfort. Looking at her now, Liam felt both determined to find a solution and terrified of making the wrong choice. The morning sun barely peeked through Liam's kitchen window as he hunched over his laptop, surrounded by scattered notes and an empty coffee mug. His eyes were tired, but focused as he scrolled through another nonprofit's website, jotting down contact information and requirements for animal therapy certification. Sky lay nearby, watching him with curious eyes. Every few minutes, Liam would glance at her and manage a small smile, despite the knot of worry in his stomach about Ms. Thompson's threat of disciplinary action. "Look at this one, girl," he murmured, clicking on a promising link. "The Community Healing Partnership. They already work with rescue animals." His voice trailed off as he added the organization to his growing list of possibilities. Later that afternoon at the park, Liam watched in amazement as Sky bounded after a tennis ball, her tail held high. Mateo's laugh rang out across the grass as she brought it back, dropping it at his feet with an expectant look. Gone was the frightened dog who had hidden under his kitchen table just weeks ago. "Mr. Lawson?" A quiet voice drew his attention. Sarah Martinez, one of the foster mothers, stood beside him, watching her son playing with the other children. "I wanted you to know. Tommy started talking again this week. Just little things, but—" Her eyes welled up. "He hasn't said a word since the incident with his birth family. The doctor said it was selective mutism, but these sessions—" She wiped her eyes. "They're making such a difference." Liam's throat tightened as he watched Tommy, usually so withdrawn, giggling as Sky gently nosed his hand for more treats. As the sun began to set, Liam gathered the families in a circle. His heart pounded as he explained the situation with his workplace and the threat to his job. To his surprise, instead of disappointment or anger, he was met with immediate support. "We'll write letters," Mrs. Martinez said firmly. "All of us. We'll tell them what these sessions have done for our kids." "I can get testimonials from Tommy's therapist," another parent added. "She's noticed huge improvements." "And I work at the local paper," Mark, a foster father, chimed in. "We could do a story about the impact of animal therapy on foster children." Liam looked around the circle of determined faces, feeling a surge of hope. These families understood what was at stake because they saw the changes in their children every day. As Sky pressed against his leg, tail wagging contentedly, he felt stronger, knowing he wasn't fighting this battle alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Liam walked into his supervisor's office, his heart pounding. Ms. Thompson sat behind her desk with her usual stern expression, but next to her was David Chen, the senior manager of community programs. Liam's mouth went dry. "Have a seat, Mr. Lawson," Ms. Thompson said, her tone clipped. But before she could continue, Mr. Chen leaned forward with an unexpected smile. "I heard about your therapy sessions from Angela Martinez. She's my neighbor, and she can't stop talking about the amazing progress her foster son has made." Liam blinked, struggling to process this turn of events. His supervisor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Tell me more about your program," Mr. Chen said, genuine interest in his eyes. "How did you come up with the idea?" For the next 20 minutes, Liam described how Sky's presence had helped break through to children like Mateo and Tommy. His voice grew stronger as he shared stories of breakthrough moments and small victories. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need," Mr. Chen said when Liam finished. He turned to Ms. Thompson. "Why wasn't I informed about this earlier?" Before she could respond, he faced Liam again. "I want you to put together a formal proposal. Include everything: the success stories, the methodology, potential risks and solutions. We could make this an official program." "But the liability issues," Ms. Thompson started. "Can be addressed through proper channels," Mr. Chen cut in. "What matters is that it's working." Back at home that evening, Liam sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by notes and his laptop. He carefully documented each child's progress, included testimonials from foster parents, and outlined safety protocols. The words flowed easily as he described Sky's journey from fearful rescue dog to gentle therapy companion. As the clock ticked past midnight, Liam felt his eyes growing heavy. Sky, who had been watching him work, padded over and rested her head on his lap. Her warm presence grounded him, reminding him of why this mattered so much. "We've come so far, haven't we, girl?" he whispered, running his hand over her soft fur as he looked at his nearly finished proposal on the screen. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he walked into the boardroom, clutching his proposal folder close to his chest. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating the polished conference table where 8 executives sat waiting. Mr. Chen stood at the head of the table, offering an encouraging smile. "Everyone, this is Liam Lawson," Mr. Chen announced. "He's developed an innovative approach to helping our foster children through animal-assisted therapy." Liam took a deep breath and began setting up his presentation materials. His fingers fumbled with the laptop connector, but he steadied himself by thinking of Sky's quiet strength. "Thank you for having me," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "6 months ago, I fostered a rescued German Shepherd named Sky. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into something extraordinary." He clicked through photographs showing Sky's transformation from a terrified dog to a gentle therapy companion. The executives leaned forward as he described Mateo's breakthrough, how a silent, withdrawn child had found his voice through his connection with Sky. "And then there's Ryan," Liam continued, showing a picture of the boy laughing as he threw a ball for Sky. Before meeting Sky, he hadn't smiled in weeks. Now his foster parents report he's talking about his feelings for the first time. A woman at the far end of the table raised her hand. "What about insurance coverage?" "The liability risks are significant." Liam nodded, prepared for this question. He outlined his research into therapy dog certification programs, insurance policies, and safety protocols. Other executives chimed in with concerns about budget and staffing, but several seemed moved by the children's stories. When the presentation ended, Mr. Chen thanked Liam and assured him they would review his proposal carefully. In the elevator ride down, Liam's heart raced as he replayed every moment of the meeting in his mind, wondering if he'd done enough to convince them. During the drive home, Liam glanced in his rearview mirror to see Sky sitting calmly in the back seat, her tail wagging slightly. The sight brought a small smile to his face, despite his anxiety about the board's pending decision. Liam's hands shook as he opened the email from the leadership team. His eyes scanned the contents quickly, and his breath caught in his throat. They had approved a trial run of the therapy program, but there was a catch. The organization wanted him to partner with an established nonprofit to handle liability and logistics. He sat back in his office chair, running his fingers through his hair. While this was definitely progress, finding a nonprofit partner wouldn't be easy, especially with the tight timeline the board had given him. Sky, who had been dozing nearby, lifted her head at his movement and tilted it slightly as if sensing his mixed emotions. "Well, girl," he said softly, "we've got more work to do." Over the next few days, Liam spent every spare moment researching local nonprofits. He created spreadsheets, made phone calls during his lunch breaks, and sent countless emails. Each evening, he'd sit at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers and his laptop, reaching out to organizations that might be interested in partnering. The responses were frustrating. While many praised the idea, their concerns were always the same: limited resources, tight budgets, or too much risk. Some wanted months of planning before committing, time Liam didn't have. Others worried about taking on a new program when their existing services were already stretched thin. "I love what you're doing," one director had told him that afternoon, "but we just can't take on anything new right now." That evening, after receiving yet another polite rejection email, Liam collapsed onto his couch. His shoulders slumped as the weight of disappointment settled over him. The board's deadline loomed closer, and he still hadn't found a willing partner. The thought of letting down the children who had made such progress with Sky made his chest tight. As he sat there, head in his hands, he felt a gentle nudge against his palm. Sky stood beside him, her nose pressed against his hand, her tail wagging softly. She looked at him with those understanding eyes that had helped so many children open up, and Liam felt something stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but determination. He reached out and scratched behind her ears, earning another tail wag. "You're right," he whispered. "We can't give up now. Not after everything we've seen you do with those kids." The phone's ring pierced the early morning quiet, startling both Liam and Sky. He fumbled for his cell phone, not recognizing the number. "Hello?" he answered, stifling a yawn. "Is this Liam Lawson?" The voice on the other end was warm and professional. "I'm Emily Matthews from Healing Paws Therapy. One of your foster families mentioned your work with Sky and the children." Liam sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. "Yes, that's right. I'd love to meet and discuss a potential partnership. Your program aligns perfectly with our mission." They arranged to meet that afternoon at a local coffee shop. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he ended the call, hope bubbling up in his chest. At the coffee shop, Emily greeted him with a firm handshake and genuine smile. Her eyes lit up as Liam described the progress he'd seen with the children, especially Mateo's transformation from silence to engagement. "I was a social worker too," Emily shared, leaning forward. "I understand the frustration of wanting to do more, but being held back by red tape." Liam nodded eagerly. "Exactly. These kids need more than just traditional therapy. Sky helps them feel safe enough to open up." They spent the next hour working through details. Emily's experience with nonprofit management complemented Liam's hands-on approach perfectly. She outlined how her organization could handle insurance, provide additional therapy dogs when needed, and help structure the sessions professionally. "We can start with twice-weekly sessions," Emily suggested, making notes. "Our organization will handle the paperwork and liability concerns, while you focus on what you do best, connecting with the kids." The weight that had been pressing on Liam's shoulders began to lift. This wasn't just a partnership of convenience. Emily truly understood his vision. Back home that evening, Liam immediately sent an update to the foster families. His fingers flew across his phone's keyboard as he shared the good news about the partnership with Healing Paws. Sky lay at his feet while he typed, her tail thumping steadily against the floor. She seemed to sense his joy, her own body relaxed and content. When he finished sending the messages, she rolled onto her side, exposing her belly, a gesture of trust she'd never shown before. "Look how far we've come, girl," Liam said softly, reaching down to scratch her belly. Her tail wagged harder, and her eyes closed in contentment. The sight filled his heart with warmth, knowing that both their futures were looking brighter. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Liam and Emily worked to transform their vision into reality. Each evening after work, Liam found himself answering emails, coordinating with foster families, and organizing supplies. Community support poured in unexpectedly. A local pet store donated treats and toys, while a printing shop offered free flyers to spread the word. "I can't believe how many people want to help," Liam told Emily during one of their planning meetings. She smiled knowingly. "Sometimes people just need a chance to do good," she replied, sorting through another stack of volunteer applications. Even Sky seemed to sense the excitement building. Her tail wagged more frequently now, and she greeted Emily with enthusiasm whenever she visited to help with preparations. On the morning of the first official session, Liam arrived early to set up. The park looked different somehow, more welcoming with the colorful signs, arranged seating areas, and designated play spaces. His heart swelled when he saw cars beginning to fill the parking lot well before the start time. Families streamed in steadily, some familiar faces and many new ones. Children of all ages gathered around, their eyes bright with curiosity. Skye, wearing her new therapy dog vest, stood proudly beside Liam, her tail wagging confidently. "Is that the famous Skye?" a mother asked, approaching with her young daughter. "We've heard so much about her from other families." Liam watched in amazement as Skye moved naturally among the growing crowd. She seemed to know exactly which children needed her most, lying quietly beside a nervous boy who sat alone, then playfully chasing a ball with more outgoing kids. Her transformation from the scared, withdrawn dog of just months ago seemed almost miraculous. Parents gathered in small groups, sharing stories and advice while their children played. Emily moved among them, answering questions and taking notes for future improvements. The atmosphere felt like a community gathering rather than a therapy session. "Look at Mateo," Emily whispered to Liam, gesturing toward where the once silent boy was teaching newer children how to throw the ball for Skye. "He's become quite the leader." As the morning progressed, Liam noticed something remarkable happening. Children who had arrived clinging to their foster parents were now laughing and playing. Parents who had seemed stressed and overwhelmed were relaxing and connecting with others who understood their challenges. When the session drew to a close, Liam stood back and observed the scene before him. Children hugged Skye goodbye, parents exchanged phone numbers, and volunteers helped clean up with cheerful energy. What had started as his small, secret mission to help a few kids had blossomed into something far more meaningful. Skye pressed against his leg, her tail still wagging despite her tiredness. For the first time since starting this journey, Liam felt truly certain about his path. This wasn't just making do or finding workarounds anymore. This was exactly where he was meant to be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official-looking envelope causing Liam's hands to tremble as he read its contents. The words blurred before his eyes. Legal notice, rightful ownership, immediate return of racing greyhound identification, number 2487, known as Skye. Skye lay nearby on her bed, watching him with concerned eyes. She must have sensed his distress because she padded over and pressed her nose against his hand. The thought of losing her, of her being forced back into the hands of someone who had hurt her, made Liam's stomach churn. He called Emily immediately, his voice shaking as he explained the situation. "Don't panic," Emily said firmly. "I know a lawyer who specializes in animal rights cases. We'll fight this." Over the next few days, Liam and Emily worked tirelessly to build their case. They gathered statements from foster families, collected veterinary records documenting Skye's previous injuries, and assembled photographs showing her transformation from a terrified, withdrawn dog to a confident therapy animal. Mateo's testimony was particularly moving. His foster mother helped him write about how Skye had given him the courage to speak again, to trust people, to believe in second chances. Other children and families contributed similar stories, each one highlighting how Skye had touched their lives. During the stressful time, Skye seemed more attuned to Liam than ever. She stayed close to him at home, resting her head on his lap while he reviewed legal documents, offering quiet comfort when he felt overwhelmed. Her presence reminded him of everything they stood to lose. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a heavy weight of anxiety. Liam dressed in his best suit, his hands shaking as he attached Skye's leash. He knew bringing her to court was risky, but Emily's lawyer had advised it might help their case. In the courtroom, Sky's former owner sat across the aisle, his face hard and dismissive. Liam felt a surge of protective anger as he remembered the scars on Sky's body, the fear in her eyes when they'd first met. Sky pressed closer to Liam's legs, but her tail remained steady, no longer tucked in fear as it once would have been. When Liam took the stand, he spoke from his heart about Sky's journey. He described her transformation from a traumatized racing dog to a gentle therapy companion who helped heal wounded children. As he talked, Sky's tail began to wag softly, her eyes fixed on him with complete trust. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at Sky's calm demeanor in the courtroom. When presented with evidence of her previous mistreatment and current success in the therapy program, his expression grew thoughtful. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge prepared to deliver his ruling. Liam held his breath, one hand resting protectively on Sky's head. He let out a sigh of relief as he heard the judge speak. They did it. The autumn breeze rustled through the park as Liam watched the therapy program's latest session unfold. 6 months had passed since the court victory, and the change in both the program and Sky was remarkable. What had started as secretive meetups in a quiet park had blossomed into a structured initiative that drew families from across the city. Sky trotted confidently between groups of children, her tail wagging freely. Gone was the frightened dog who had hidden under tables and flinched at sudden movements. In her place was a gentle, self-assured companion who seemed to know exactly which child needed her attention most. At the celebration gathering that afternoon, decorative balloons and handmade signs brightened the park pavilion. Families chatted while children played, creating a warm atmosphere of community and support. When it came time for speeches, Mateo stepped forward, clutching a piece of paper in his hands. Before I met Sky and Mr. Liam, Mateo began, his voice soft but steady, I didn't talk to anyone. I was scared all the time. He paused, looking at Sky, who sat attentively nearby. But Sky was scared too, and watching her get braver helped me feel braver. Other children followed with their own stories. A young girl described how Sky had helped her overcome her fear of dogs. A teenage boy explained how the therapy sessions had given him a reason to look forward to weekends. Each testimony brought tears to Liam's eyes as he realized the profound impact of their work. As the celebration wound down and the sun began to set, Liam found a quiet moment on a park bench. He watched as Sky played fetch with a group of laughing children, her movements fluid and joyful. The sight filled his heart with a deep sense of fulfillment, something he hadn't felt in years of social work. Sky noticed him watching and bounded over, her tail wagging wildly. She dropped her tennis ball and rested her head on his lap, looking up at him with bright, happy eyes. Liam scratched behind her ears, marveling at how far they'd both come. In helping each other heal, they had created something beautiful, a place where broken spirits could mend and find hope again. If you enjoyed the story of Liam and Sky, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.